The date is November 25th, 1177. The time is approximately 6:15 a.m. A 16-year-old boy is being strapped into armor he can barely feel. His fingers are wrapped in linen bandages, stained yellow from the salves his physicians apply each morning. The leather straps must be tightened by his squire, because Baldwin's hands no longer possess the grip strength to do it himself. Leprosy has been consuming him for 3 years. It began in his right arm when he was 13, a numbness his tutor noticed when the prince failed to react to pain during a game. Since that diagnosis, the disease has spread across his body like a slow fire. His face bears the marks. His extremities are failing. Every physician in Jerusalem agrees on one thing. This boy will not see his 25th birthday. This morning, that same boy intends to ride 40 miles and attack the most powerful military commander in the Muslim world. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Narrate History Arena. To understand what happens next, you must understand the trap Jerusalem found itself in. Saladin had accomplished what no Muslim leader had achieved in 80 years. He had unified Egypt and Syria under a single command. The Crusader states, Jerusalem, Tripoli, Antioch, had survived for decades by exploiting the divisions among their enemies. When Damascus fought Cairo, Jerusalem breathed. When the Fatimids quarreled with the Abbasids, the Franks expanded. That calculus ended when Saladin consolidated power. By the autumn of 1177, he commanded resources that dwarfed anything the Crusaders could muster. His treasury overflowed with Egyptian gold. His armies drew from Kurdish highlands, Mamluk slave soldiers, Bedouin cavalry, and Syrian infantry. In early November, Saladin crossed into Crusader territory with approximately 26,000 to 30,000 men. His objective was simple: destroy the Kingdom of Jerusalem before winter. The bulk of Jerusalem's fighting force, its professional knights and seasoned infantry, was stationed in the north near the county of Tripoli. King Baldwin had perhaps 375 knights available in the capital. When the scouts reported Saladin's numbers, the mathematics were devastating. The Royal Council convened at 9:30 p.m. on November 23rd. The debate was brief and bitter. Count Raymond of Tripoli's representatives argued for a defensive posture. Lock the gates, man the walls, pray that Saladin's supply lines stretched too thin. Was the sensible position? It was the position of men who understood conventional warfare. Baldwin listened in silence. This is documented. The chronicler William of Tyre notes that the young king said nothing during the initial debate. He sat, wrapped in his robes, his bandaged hands resting on the arms of his chair, his lesion-marked face impassive. When the arguments exhausted themselves, Baldwin finally spoke. If we hide behind these walls, Saladin will burn every village between here and the coast. He will slaughter every Christian who cannot reach sanctuary. He will demonstrate that Jerusalem cannot protect its own people. Pause. The candles flickered. I will not be the king who taught our enemies that we are afraid. Military historians have long studied the concept of initiative, the capacity to act rather than react. Defensive warfare cedes initiative to the attacker. The defender waits. The attacker chooses when, where, and how to strike. Baldwin understood something that his advisers did not in the psychological warfare between kingdoms. Perception matters as much as reality. If Saladin ravaged the countryside unopposed, every vassal lord would question whether Jerusalem could defend them. The kingdom would collapse from within before any siege began. By choosing to attack, Baldwin reclaimed initiative. He transformed the narrative from Jerusalem hides to Jerusalem fights. At 5 a.m. on November 24th, the army assembled. 375 knights, approximately 3,000 infantry, 80 Templar knights under the command of Grand Master Odo de Saint-Amand, who had ridden through the night from Gaza after receiving Baldwin's summons. The True Cross, the most sacred relic in Christendom, believed to be the actual wood upon which Christ was crucified, was brought forth from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. It would ride with them into battle. The march to Ascalon covered approximately 40 miles. Baldwin rode at the head of the column, though his body protested every stride. The jolting of the horse sent pain radiating through joints already swollen with disease. Twice his attendants offered to let him ride in a litter. Twice he refused. "The men must see their king mounted," he said. "They must see that I do not ask of them what I will not give myself." They reached Ascalon by late afternoon on November 24th. What Baldwin found there forced an immediate reassessment. Saladin's army was visible on the coastal plain, a vast encampment stretching toward the horizon. The scouts reported numbers that confirmed the worst fears: nearly 30,000 men, with more detachments raiding inland. Baldwin ordered the gates of Ascalon closed. For one night, he would wait. This is the silence the chronicles do not fully capture. A 16-year-old boy, dying by inches, standing on ancient walls, watching 30,000 enemies prepare to destroy everything he loves. The weight of a kingdom resting on shoulders that could barely support his own armor. What did he think about during those hours? We do not know. William of Tyre records that Baldwin prayed, but offers no details. The inner life of kings is rarely preserved. What we do know is what he decided. At 2:15 a.m. on November 25th, scouts reported critical intelligence. Saladin, believing Ascalon contained only a frightened garrison, had divided his forces. The Sultan himself, with roughly 8,000 men, was camped near the hill of Montgisard, approximately 12 miles northeast. His remaining forces were scattered across the countryside, looting, raiding, enjoying the spoils of an unopposed invasion. Saladin had made the mistake that experienced commanders sometimes make. He had underestimated a desperate opponent. Baldwin called his commanders together at 3 a.m. "Saladin believes we are beaten," he said. "He believes Jerusalem will not fight. His army is spread across 20 miles of countryside. His guard is down." Odo de Saint-Amand, the Templar Grand Master, studied the map. He was a hard man, famously fierce, feared by enemies and allies alike. He looked at the young king with something approaching respect. "You propose to attack," Odo said. "Was not a question." "I propose to attack now," Baldwin replied, "before his forces reunite, before he realizes we have left Ascalon. The mathematics were still brutal. 500 knights and 3,000 infantry against 8,000 of Saladin's best troops. But the alternative, waiting for 30,000 to concentrate, was certain annihilation. They left Ascalon at 4:30 a.m. Baldwin rode at the front, the true cross carried behind him by the Bishop of Bethlehem. The march was silent. No drums, no horns. Scouts rode ahead, checking for enemy patrols. The column moved through the Judean lowlands, using ravines and wadis to mask their approach. By 3:30 p.m., they reached the high ground overlooking Montgisard. Below them, Saladin's camp spread across the valley floor. What the Crusaders saw confirmed every hope and justified every risk. Saladin's camp was not prepared for attack. Horses grazed unsaddled. Soldiers rested in the afternoon heat. Supply wagons were arranged for convenience, not defense. The few sentries faced outward toward the coast, watching for threats from Ascalon's direction, not from the inland hills behind them. Saladin had committed the fundamental error of assumption. He assumed Baldwin was trapped. He assumed the Crusader army was too weak to attack. He assumed his overwhelming numbers guaranteed safety. Assumption is the mother of catastrophe. Baldwin dismounted. His legs trembled with the effort, but he knelt in the dust. His knights knelt around him. The true cross was raised. The prayer was brief. These were not men asking for miracles. They were men preparing to die and seeking peace with that fact. When Baldwin rose, his voice carried across the ranks. There stands the man who would erase us from history. He believes God has turned his face from us. He believes we are already corpses. Let us show him how wrong he is. The Templar cavalry formation was designed for one purpose: to break enemy lines through concentrated, unstoppable impact. 80 Templars formed the tip of the wedge, the most heavily armored, the most disciplined, riding the strongest war horses. Behind them, the remaining knights arranged themselves in expanding ranks. The formation resembled an arrowhead, designed to punch through resistance and create chaos in its wake. The infantry would follow, exploiting the gaps the cavalry created. At approximately 4:15 p.m., Baldwin raised his sword. The late afternoon sun caught the blade. The charge began. The descent from the ridge covered perhaps half a mile. The Crusaders held formation, resisting the urge to sprint prematurely. Discipline was everything. A scattered charge would be absorbed. A unified impact would devastate. Saladin's camp began to react. Shouts of alarm, men scrambling for weapons, horses bucking against handlers, trying to saddle them. Officers screaming orders that collided and contradicted. Was already too late. The Templar wedge struck the forward pickets at full gallop. The impact was not a collision. It was an erasure. The first rank of defenders simply ceased to exist as organized resistance. Lances punched through shields. Horses trampled men still reaching for swords. The momentum carried the wedge deep into the camp before any significant resistance could form. Behind the Templars, Baldwin rode with the second wave. His sword rose and fell Chronicles record that despite his disease, despite hands that could barely grip, he fought with a fury that startled even his own men. Saladin was eating when the attack began. His personal guard surrounded him immediately, dragging him toward his mount. The Sultan tried to organize a counterattack, but cohesion had already collapsed. The Crusader infantry poured into the breaches the cavalry had created. What had been an organized military camp became a killing ground. Mamluk cavalry attempted a countercharge on the eastern flank. The Templars wheeled to meet them, a maneuver requiring extraordinary discipline under combat conditions. The collision was brutal, but the Templars held. By 5 p.m., Saladin's command structure had disintegrated. Units fought in isolation, unable to coordinate, unable to retreat in good order. The Sultan himself escaped only because his personal guard sacrificed themselves to buy him time. He fled on a racing camel, leaving behind his army, his treasury, and his reputation for invincibility. By nightfall, Saladin's field army had effectively ceased to exist. Estimates suggest between 4,000 and 6,000 of his soldiers died at Montgisard. Thousands more scattered into the desert, many dying of exposure and thirst before reaching friendly territory. Crusader losses were significant but sustainable. Approximately 1,100 killed and 750 wounded out of roughly 3,500 engaged. Baldwin IV had accomplished the impossible. A force outnumbered nearly 10 to 1 had destroyed an enemy army through surprise, audacity, and overwhelming violence of action. Baldwin collapsed moments after the battle ended. His physicians worked through the night. The exertion had accelerated his disease. Every chronicler agrees on this point. The leprosy that might have given him another decade now had perhaps 8 years of destruction remaining. He had traded his future for his kingdom's survival. He had known the cost before he ordered the charge. When asked by William of Tyre why he had risked so much, Baldwin reportedly replied, "Because someone had to." The kingdom celebrated, but the celebration was muted. The people of Jerusalem looked at their king, this bandaged, broken boy who had saved them, and understood what the victory had cost him. Saladin retreated to Damascus. He would return. He would eventually take Jerusalem in 1187. 10 years later, 2 years after Baldwin's death. The tragedy of Montgisard is that it delayed, but did not prevent the fall. Yet, delay matters. Because of Baldwin's impossible charge, thousands lived who would have died. Children were born who would have never existed. The story of Christian Jerusalem continued for another decade because a dying teenager refused to accept defeat. Baldwin IV died on March 16th, 1185. He was 24 years old. By the end, he could not walk, he could not see, he could barely speak. The leprosy had consumed nearly everything. Yet he ruled until his final breath. He fought until his body physically could not continue. He never surrendered. He never despaired. He never accepted the verdict his disease had pronounced upon him. Military academies still study Montgisard. Historians still debate how so few defeated so many. The tactical elements, surprise, concentration of force, exploitation of enemy overconfidence, are all present in the textbooks. But the textbooks miss the essential truth. Montgisard was not won by tactics. It was won by a boy who looked at 30,000 enemies and saw not impossibility, but opportunity, who measured his life, not in years remaining, but in deeds accomplished, who understood that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else matters more than fear. When history remembers Baldwin IV, it does not remember the disease. It remembers the charge. When students of warfare study Montgisard, they do not study the numbers. They study the will. When those facing impossible odds look for inspiration, they find it in a 16-year-old king who could barely hold his sword but refused to let go. This was Montgisard. This was Baldwin IV. This was the day 500 proved that 30,000 means nothing when you decide to become ungovernable. This Narrate history arena, where the past does not just speak, it charges.